following the ways of God and not leaning on our own ways, our own understanding. So why are we doing this, you ask? Well, it's simple. We live in a world that desperately needs wisdom. In a world that is starving and crying out for something greater than the path that they are on. I mean, think about it. We're telling individuals in this world that you can have relationships, you can have sex with anyone, whoever, whenever, however you want to. The sexual revolution is in full throttle, but the question is it really wise? Is that really what God desires for us, or is His way a little bit better? Living under the relationship of one man and one woman committed through marriage for life. We tell our young people to go to college and spend $100,000 or more in debt to get out and to work a job where they're going to be making $25,000 or $30,000 a year. If you've ever tried to pay off $100,000 in debt and $30,000 of income, you realize probably not the greatest thing to do. Am I saying we shouldn't go to college? No, not at all. Am I saying that maybe your little son and daughter doesn't need to go to the most expensive and elite school in the country to work at Starbucks at minimum wage? Yes, probably saying that. Is there a better way for a young person to find a future that is good? A way to make a decent living. Of course, we have our social media accounts and we spout off on all sorts of issues, but again, is this the right way? Is this the right path to go? You've seen the news this week, you realize how much social media and saying words that are out there on the internet, how much it can cost, as Roseanne Barr is just one example who lost a lucrative television deal, all because of the words she said and posted. I find myself, not a guy who likes to use social media a lot or whatever, really don't think you're interested in what I had for lunch. Most of the time I'm not either. But I find myself asking, how wise am I in the words that I say? And it's not just on social media, it's even in our conversations with each other. How wise am I being in the words I've chosen to use and say? So my challenge then is over the next several weeks is to convince you that living God's way, that following God's path, is really the best way to go in life. My challenge is to plead with you, to implore you that there is a better way to live, and your challenge is to ask yourself, how is the way I'm living working out for me right now? Is what I am doing, is the path that I am on in life really the wisest and the best way for me to go? Or is there a better way to follow? And so as we begin, we should ask, first of all, what is wisdom? What is wisdom? The word wisdom conjures up many different images and thoughts in our mind. We think often of the old man on the mountain, you know, with a pipe or whatever, sitting there with the long hair, and he's sitting there in the lotus position or whatever, and we think, oh, he's a wise old man. I'm resisting the temptation to bring out a Yoda reference because I'm not much of a Star Wars fan here, and my kids would yell at me. We think of a fortune cookie or a horoscope, or, oh, I know we wouldn't talk about that because we're Christians. Maybe it's a Christian thought of the day. Nice little saying that depicts for us a word of wisdom. Dictionary.com defines wisdom as the quality or the state of being wise, the knowledge of what is true or right, coupled with just judgment as to action, sagacity, discernment, or insight. And I like those words that are there. Knowing what is true, coupled with knowing how to enact what is true. In other words, it's not just the idea that you know what is true and right to do, but that you actually do something about it. In biblical terms, wisdom is defined as the skill of godly living with respect to God and people. This is what wisdom is, the skill of godly wisdom. Learning how to live with God and with each other. This is what true wisdom is. And I think Solomon defines that very thing in verses 1 to 5. Notice what he says here. The Proverbs of Solomon are for receiving instruction and prudent behavior. It's for doing what is right and just and fair. His Proverbs are for giving prudence to those who are simple, knowledge and discretion to those that are young. In other words, Solomon is saying that these Proverbs, these sayings are here to give instruction on how to act and to know what is right and just and fair. These words are here so that you know how to order your life in the midst of this world that we are living in. And let me just say, as we get started here, understand that Proverbs are not law. In other words, they're not part of God's law for us. So we know what God's law says. It says, thou shalt not kill. Okay, and there's really no ifs, ands, or buts about it, whatever. We understand what God's law says there. But when you read a proverb, not every time does it work out. But these are principles that work 99.9% of the time. Now we have to balance them with God's sovereignty and what God determines is best and right. But the reason they are here and the reason that they are in God's inspired word is because if we heed the words of King Solomon, we will know how to live in this world. This is very necessary. Think about what Paul tells us in Ephesians chapter 5. He says, be careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity, because the days are evil. Don't be foolish, but understand what God's will is. In other words, he lays out in chapter 5 how we should conduct and order our lives, how we should not be using coarse and perverse language and foolish jesting and everything else. And the reason we are to do that is because we are living in this world and we are to live as individuals filled with the wisdom of God. Therefore, don't be foolish, but understand what God's will is. And then, of course, the very next verse, don't be drunk with wine, but be filled with the Spirit. Again, living as wise individuals. Or think about these words, Philippians chapter 2. Therefore, my dear friends, as you have always obeyed, not only in my presence, but now much more in my absence, continue to work out your own salvation with fear and trembling, for it is God who works in you to will and to act in order to fulfill His good purposes. And here's the catch, verse 14. Do everything without grumbling or arguing. Should I camp out on that verse for a couple hours? I won't, because those that live in glass houses should not throw stones, right? But think about those words. It says the reason we do everything without grumbling or arguing is so that we can become blameless and pure children of God without fault in a warped and crooked generation. In other words, the very fact that I live my life without complaining, without grumbling, without arguing, already sets me apart from so many individuals in this world. You see, we need wisdom to help us to know how to live and order our life. Peter Drucker is a management expert who wrote one time, too often people focus on efficiency, which is doing things right, instead of on effectiveness, which is doing the right thing. He said there are a few things less pleasing